Welcome to the CSAE podcast series, Best Minds and Associations. And we're really grateful to have a great mind with us today, Glenda Mostek, Executive Director of the Colorado Nursery and Greenhouse Association. Glenda, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here.
Let me tell you a little bit about Glenda. So she joined CNGA in January of 2020. So if you do the math, you'll know Glenda joined just prior to the pandemic hitting. So I'm sure she's going to have some interesting things to share with us. Prior to that, Glenda served as grant manager and marketing specialist for the Colorado Department of Agriculture. Glenda spent the last 5.5 years helping people with innovative visions to improve their communities, industries, and lives. Before joining CDA, Glenda worked for 6 years at Colorado Wheat, encompassing a checkoff organization, a member association, and a research foundation. And prior to that, and I think this just sounds like such a cool organization, Glenda was with the National Honey Board. So if we have time today, Glenda, maybe you can share a little story about the National Honey Board. So listen, thanks for being with us. As I mentioned earlier, and we were chatting a little bit, you joined just before kind of everything broke loose. And so tell me a little bit about your experience of when you jumped into working with the Colorado Nursery and Greenhouse Association and trying to build relationships and just what it was like joining just prior to the pandemic taking over.
Sure. Well, I started, and not 3 weeks later, we had our major convention that we do in conjunction with the other green organizations in Colorado. And so a convention downtown with thousands of people, and I got to meet all kinds of people and spend time with some of my members. And we had a board meeting in February, so it was very busy, and I was still kind of just taking it in, drinking from the fire hose. And then bang, our March board meeting was done via Zoom. So I was both grateful that I had the opportunity to meet a bunch of people at our convention and to kind of get to know the industry a little bit at the convention, and to have a board meeting in person with my board. But also that was time that had kind of taken up time when I normally maybe could have been out visiting members and getting to know people. So there were advantages and disadvantages to both of those things. But then going Zoom, it was immediately like, okay, you've got to pivot and do new things in a job that you don't know yet. And that you don't fully understand, and you don't understand how the industry works. So now this year, I feel like I am having a first year in the job where I learn how things would work in the normal course of a year with CNGA. But, also the opportunities presented by the pandemic year to maybe spend more time in the office by myself and explore the files and explore the network and do some independent learning. I tried to seize those the best I could while figuring out what I was supposed to be doing.
I'll bet. So I was on your website earlier, and by nature, I would think, no pun intended, but by nature, your board, your members, they're outdoor people, right? And so they're very much used, I'm sure, to being free and outdoors and working outdoors. How did tell me a little bit, tell the audience a little bit about how that may have impacted your members and your leadership a little bit differently than some other typical membership-based organizations.
Sure. Well, we were indeed fortunate in that, being an outdoor industry, we did not suffer the downturn that several industries did. And so many of my members were busier than they had ever been, because people were limited to their houses and their gardens, and they went out and bought every seed and every plant and every pound of potting soil that they possibly could and put it to use in their own landscape. So my members were very busy, and busy members doing a lot of business, making a lot of money. Those are happy members.
Those are happy members. You're right.
But I would say they're also an industry that very much likes to meet in person. It's all about handshakes and talking in person and developing those relationships. So that was very difficult for my industry. And the board did not like meeting online. That was a challenge for them. We met in person with social distancing really as long as we could before things started to get bad. And we're looking forward to this July when we are planning on meeting in person again. But we were also fortunate in that some of our events were already outdoor events. We have some member barbecues that are kind of social get-togethers. And so we went ahead with those, not quite as normal, But in August and September, we did get together. We got together outside and kind of had, picnic type events and with social distancing and with masks. And everyone was very happy and delighted to be able to get together like that.
I'll bet. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So knowing what you know now, and hindsight, one of my father's favorite sayings, hindsight's 2020, right? And we all know what we would like to have done differently. How could you share some thoughts and maybe some suggestions for some of our people listening, Tab? What would you have done differently in the last 12 to 15 months since you started?
I would say I would have started over communicating to a fault earlier. Lately, I've started giving my board a email update, just saying what we've been up to here in the office, because sometimes they have busy lives. They're very busy at work right now.
Sure.
And it's good for them to get an email saying, hey, we've been working on this, this, and this. This has been a challenge. This is something that other members have reported to us that they're having difficulties with, such as we're having transportation challenges all over the industry right now. And I wish I would have started that earlier. I think that is kind of a good practice, and it doesn't have to be regular. It can kind of ebb and flow as the office is busier and as the staff are busier. The board has really appreciated that, and I get really good feedback on that. And I would say, I guess, give yourself as much grace as possible. Take care of yourself, personal wellness, time, mental health days. Sure. Doing what you can to pamper yourself and have fun during this strange time of life, because you have to take care of yourself first, or you're not going to be able to take care of your staff and your board.
So Glenda, talk to us a little bit about that. You have a number of staff people on your team. As their leader, what did you do to make life and make the work life and their life, if you will, bearable and productive? And I'm sure they look to you. So what would you share that was some effective practices that you had in that area?
Sure. Well, my belief has always been you put your team first. And one of my team members lives fairly close to the office and has maybe not the best situation to work in at home, just kind of a noisier home life and not really good internet connectivity.
Sure.
And so his preference was to come in and work in the office. And so when we were really limiting social contact, he would be in the office and I would work at home, and our other staff person would work at home. And then I would come in, I would, take Friday afternoon off or something and then come in and work on things that I needed to be at my office computer with on the weekends. And, just kind of doing flex time like that worked well for our staff.
And going forward, what are you seeing now? I mean, I know that we talked to a lot of our colleagues about, and some are full 100% back in the office, and others are kind of trying to get a feel for what their team wants. What are you seeing with your group?
We are 100% in the office right now, but maintaining that flexibility that if anyone needs to work from home because they have a contractor coming or a repair person, or they maybe have a cold and don't want to come in and share it with the rest of us, that they can work from home. And I think we've discovered we have the tools to do that now. And we certainly have the tools through Zoom to meet if we need to meet and talk things through. And there's a lot of powerful tools out there right now to allow working virtually. But the three of us are fairly social people, and I think we'd like being together in the office.
I'll bet. Yeah, it's interesting. I read an article this week that when you interview people, the question of flex time was at least for me, it was maybe half the time it was mentioned. And the prediction is, now when you interview people, not just necessarily young people, but when you interview people, they're going to want to know, what are the expectations from a physical be in the office standpoint versus, being able to work from home or be able to work virtually. So I think we're all in for a pretty interesting thing coming forward. So Glenn, again, was on your website, and your board is unique. You have a pretty significant I'll call it young professionals, but you can expound a little bit on it. What it's called, Young Horts, is that correct? So stands for horticulturists, I'm assuming.
Yes.
How is that group having an impact, positive or negative, on your organization? And what do you see that that group kind of growing into in the future?
That group has both a social aspect, which I think is very important to our industry and to that group, but also they are working with bringing more young people into the industry. Like many industries, we have workforce challenges, and not everyone going to college thinks, hey, I'd like to work in a nursery or greenhouse. Even, coming from an agricultural background, it's sometimes difficult for students who want to be in agriculture to find an agricultural job.
Sure.
And they don't always think of nursery and greenhouse. And there's plenty of opportunities there from, being in sales, being in research. There's, everything from science to accounting involved in the horticultural professions. And so the young hort professionals want to spread that message, and they work quite a bit with, local high schools that have horticulture programs, and to get that out there that, hey, this might be something to look at majoring in college, and that this could really be fun and really interesting and a great career.
So great ambassadors for the industry.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. So I didn't ask you this question before we started, so here comes a little bit of a zinger. Can you share a story maybe that you've experienced in the last since you started back in January of 2020? Can you share a story that either a positive story or a negative story, or something that started bad that ended good, maybe an experience that you had during these really, really challenging times? If not, no problem. I got more stuff to ask you.
No, I'd like to share a story about the value of associations.
Wonderful.
Our association not only encompasses Colorado, but encompasses some members in New Mexico. And the New Mexico government had much more restricted lockdown regulations. And my members down in New Mexico were closed. And in Colorado, we had a great relationship with the governor and with the commissioner of agriculture. And we were able to maintain nurseries and greenhouses and garden centers being open as essential businesses. And this wasn't the case in New Mexico. So we really worked hard and, worked the phones, worked the emails, you name it, lobbying the governor in New Mexico to get nurseries and greenhouses open, even at least partially. For a while, it was just, there were 50% capacity, but they could do some business. They were not just totally closed. And so that was a real victory, and, they appreciated it. And I was happy we were able to do it. And then I was interviewed by a TV station in Albuquerque, about how this had happened and how people could go out now and buy plants and make their homes and yards and gardens better. And I got a Facebook message from someone who owned a pawn shop in New Mexico and said, the pawn shops are closed. Can you help us get open again? And that is why you have an association. Because Amen. The voices of many are louder than the voice of one. And you have that staff who goes to work for you with the legislature, with the governor, with Department of Transportation, whoever it is that is maybe, not presenting the best circumstances for your members. You have a strong, united voice.
Sure.
And so I told that story several times last year to our membership, saying, this is why we are here, is to keep you open and keep you doing business and keep your interests at the forefront.
What a great story. And it's so true. And it's so unfortunate because there are a lot of industries, particularly smaller industries, that they just don't have the resources for, someone to organize and advocate. And I looked on your website and I saw a picture of some of your people. It looked like they were testifying down at the Capitol. So really, really a perfect story. So Glenda, share with our audience, what are some things that some personal traits that you can share with our listening audience today for being, not just being an effective executive director in the pandemic, but what are some things that you'd like to share with some people about what's helped you have obviously a very successful and illustrious career?
Well, one of the questions they asked me in my interview was, what are the two most important things in life? And I thought, well, gee, that's a real softball. But I believe that my two most important things have served me very well this year. And the first one is relationships. Through my jobs, going back to the honey board, going back before that, the most enjoyable part of the job has been going out with the farmers with the suppliers, with anybody who's in the industry, and, ride around with them in their truck for a day, or just take them to lunch and pick their brain, and not just about their job, but about their family and about their background and how did they end up in this place? Because everybody has a story, and those stories are fascinating. And that is what feeds me, is the people's stories and hearing their experiences. And you can always learn from something from them.
Sure.
And then that relationship is enriched by your interest in them. They will remember that you wanted to hear that. So that helps build those relationships. And, I have friends that you can pick up with again after you haven't seen them for 5 years, because we rode around in a pickup all over the Eastern Plains, going to meetings in every county. I really value those. Those are the most valuable things I've taken away from many jobs. And my second most important thing was learning. And I am a lifelong learner, and I firmly believe that is very important to keep growing. Just yesterday, I taught myself how to use Adobe Rush Premiere to make short videos for social media. Okay. And while frustrating to my older brain, it was also extremely fun when I figured out what was going on and how to do this. And boy, last year with the pandemic was a learning opportunity like no other.
You got that
and,
right.
Many things that I wouldn't have learned had we not been going through the quarantine and the lockdown. So even though it was awful and lonely and I wouldn't want to go through it again, I find the value in the learning opportunities.
Those are great examples. There's a great author, Brene Brown, wrote a book about vulnerable leadership. And I think what we've all learned this year, and it goes back to what you said about relationships, is, people open themselves up this year, and there was a lot of emotion, there was a lot of loss, a lot of illness. And so I think we've all, because many of our guests that have been on our podcast have shared a similar type of story where, the business piece was always important, but that relationship piece really, really became important. So Glenda, before we close, I have to ask, you got to tell us a little bit about the National Honey Board. I love honey, right? I mean, it's a big part of our life and our diets and things. I know it's not the most healthy thing in the world to eat, but tell us a little bit about the Honey Board.
Well, as you would guess, it was a really fun place to work.
Yeah.
And we had all kinds of honey all the time from all over the place, and you see usually one or two kinds of honey in the supermarket, but there also are honey varietals when the bees have been, primarily near one crop or near one type of flower. And one really interesting kind of honey is kudzu honey from the South. Okay. And it is, kudzu apparently doesn't always flower, so it is fairly rare. But that honey is deep purple in color and tastes a little like grapes.
Wow. Never heard of that before. Wow.
And then one of the really interesting things is that people would call us up at the office and tell us how honey had been good for them medically. Sometimes in far more detail than we really wanted to know from a stranger on the phone.
I'm sure. Oh, that's awesome. Well, listen, Glenda Mostek, the Executive Director, Colorado Nursery and Greenhouse Association, greatly appreciate your time today and sharing some of your stories. We want to remind our audience that this podcast will be available through the CSAE website, csae.org, along with the other podcasts that we've had available. And also want to remind everybody to come to Vail for the CSAE conference, which is June 30th through July 2nd. The numbers are growing, and we've been promised beautiful weather in Vail, and it's going to be an in-person meeting. We will be practicing good social distancing, and the hotel has really got their act together as it relates to the Grand Hyatt up in Vail. We'll be ready, so check that out too. Glenda, thanks again for joining us today, and we appreciate you being part of CSA, and we appreciate all of our audience today. Thank you.
Thank you.